Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Church of Grace. My name is Patrick Hayes, and today is February 23rd. It is a Friday, and we are in Matthew. We're going to be in chapter 9, and we are in part 19. Now, I wrote that we were in part 19 last week, and that was a mistake. We were in part 18, but I know for a fact that nobody here cares, because that doesn't help anyone unless you're at home watching these on YouTube and you're trying to keep track of where we are. And in that case, we write a title in, and it is correct, even though I announce it incorrectly. For several reasons, I'm unorganized. I can't read Roman numerals very well, and I'd appreciate it if no one would make fun of me for that, because it's a sensitive topic. Okay, so let us start in where we left off, Matthew chapter 9. I'm going to open my Bible to get there, Matthew chapter 9, and let's read verses 14, 15, 16, and 17, and then we will jump in. Excuse me. Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast oft, but thy disciples fast not?" And Jesus said unto them, "Can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast. No man putteth a piece of new cloth onto an old garment, for that which is put in to fill it up taketh from the garment, and the rent is made worse. Neither do men put new wine into old bottles, else the bottles break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish. But they put new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved." Okay, and let's jump in here. So verse 14, we're going to start out with a question. I got a lot of questions for everybody this week. First question, John who? John the Baptist. Very good. I'd appreciate a raised hand, Mason, but other than that, it was very good. Mason. Very good. John the Baptist. Okay, so John the Baptist was a rabbi. He had disciples. He had fellows that followed him in his teaching, and we run into these fellows a few times. So these guys come to Jesus. Now, one thing that's interesting is every time the disciples of John the Baptist come to Jesus, they are not like the Pharisees and the scribes trying to trick Jesus and condemn him for the way he said this or did that. They always have very sincere questions. And you can tell that these guys really want to know an answer. And I'm sure it's refreshing. And Jesus always gives them an answer. The Pharisees, Jesus doesn't always give them a straightforward answer. Sometimes he tells them what their problem is first. And the reason for that is, you ever talk to someone where they ask you a question, and you've seen this with a reporter interviewing someone that they don't like. And they ask them a question. And the question isn't sincere. It's a gotcha question. They just want to get an answer that they can use for a soundbite to make the person sound stupid. And when Jesus gets those questions, he skips the question. And he goes right to the problem. And we'll see him do this with the Pharisees later. My point is, he answers the question. John's disciples want to know from Jesus, so they come to him and they ask him something very sincere. But what they've noticed is that Jesus and his disciples don't fast. Why was that strange? Why did they notice that? Mac? Very good. All the Jews kind of fast on the same day. So it was customary at the time, the Jews in the days of Jesus, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, they all fasted. And they would fast once a week. And they would all do it on the same day. So it was obvious when someone wasn't fasting, because everyone was. So they noticed this. And that's why they're saying, these guys fast, regularly. And we notice that you guys don't, so what's going on with that? All right, let's see where we are. Verse 15. Before we get into verse 15 and Jesus' answer, Jewish wedding. The model of the Jewish wedding is very helpful to Scripture. And there are some neat things in Jewish culture that we find that are prophetic, meaning they predict the future, and the Jews didn't even know what they were doing when they set this up. And what that tells us is that God's hand was even in the customs of the Jewish people. So there are several steps to the Jewish wedding. So am I going to write it up here? No, I'm not. So the first step, well, how about this? Okay, so in the Jewish wedding, the analogy is that you have a bride and a groom who are going to get married. And the analogy shows us, or in the analogy, we should say, who is the groom in the analogy of the Jewish wedding? Very good, Heather. Jesus. He is the groom. Who is the bride? Okay, very good. Everybody. So we're all just taking after Mason. No one's raising our hands. We're just going to have pandemonium tonight. That's fine. I can get on board with that. Okay, so the bride is what the Bible calls the church. So the church is made up of all born-again believers. If you are saved, it doesn't matter where you go to church, what group you follow, it has no bearing. If you are born again, blood-washed believer in Christ, you are part of what the Bible calls the church. So the church is the bride of Christ. That's one of the titles for the church. So we have the groom is Jesus, the bride is the church. So what we have in the Jewish wedding starts out with the betrothal. So what happens is there is a price for the bride. So we've all heard of a dowry. Well, this is the opposite. Instead of the bride's family paying the groom's family something, this is the groom and his family paying something for the bride. Now, the analogy is simple because what did Jesus pay for the church? Mac? His life. He paid his life, and he paid for the bride in blood. So that was the payment for the bride. So then what happens in the Jewish wedding, and just to give you a few more details, the Jewish wedding was an arranged marriage, but it wasn't arranged in the way we would think of an arranged marriage in parts of the Middle East, which I understand Israel is in parts of the Middle East, but I mean the Arabic parts of the Middle East. It's not an arranged marriage that we would think of, say, in the nation of India today, where the bride and the groom might never have met until on their wedding day. This was an arranged marriage where the parents of both families were involved, but the bride got a veto. So the parents of the groom, the parents of the bride, they get together. Hey, we like your son. Hey, we like your daughter. We think they'd make a good match, and they're good kids, and they were raised right, and we like you guys. So how about we set these kids up? And the families would get to know each other. And the intent was for the young man and the young lady to meet each other and spend time with each other under the direction of the parents in a safe environment. And then hopefully a romance is kindled. And then the young man would propose to the young woman, and the parents on both sides would give a thumbs up. And then it was up to the young lady. And if she gave a thumbs down, that's it. The whole thing's off and we're starting over. No one's getting married. So after the young lady says, yep, I'm in for it, then what would happen is the young man would leave. Where did he go? Nick. He went to build a house. That's right. The groom departs to his father's house to build an addition on the house for his new bride to move into when the wedding is consummated. So, Jesus, after the resurrection, he ascended into heaven, and he literally said, I go to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I come again, and when I come, there you will be. Now I butchered the last part. But he's going to come back for his bride. So in the same way, the young man would leave. He would literally go and build like an addition on his father's house. Okay, that was their starter home. And then when the father said, okay, it's time, go get your bride, he would go to pick up his bride in the middle of the night, and the bride prepares for his imminent return. She doesn't know when he's coming back. She is waiting. And she is waiting with the help of her sisters, her family, and they want to keep her, what the Bible says, is spotless and without blemish. When the groom shows up, she wanted to look her best. The Christian's goal is to live an exemplary Christian life, so when the Lord Jesus comes back, he doesn't find us, I don't know, drunk at a ball game, dealing meth in the bathroom. I mean, what do we not want Jesus to find us doing, right? Probably a lot of things. I kind of went dark there for a second. That was kind of an extreme, but we get the point, right? Yeah, came in strong with that one, Patrick. So in the same, that's the analogy. And any woman who's gotten married can appreciate that. She wants to look good on her wedding day, right? Pictures are going to be taken. In this case, I don't know, oil on canvas. It took a while. Okay. So she doesn't know when the groom is coming back. The groom is going to come by surprise. He's going to go and fetch his bride and in the middle of the night take her back to her father's house where this room has been made. The church today calls this event yet future what? What do we call it? It's the rapture. Right? Jesus is in his father's house preparing a place in this mansion, waiting for the father to say, go get the bride. And when he comes, it's going to be as a thief in the night. The return of the Lord Jesus is imminent. We don't know when it's going to happen. Okay, this thing preaches itself. So the rapture is the event when Christ returns and takes us home. Any questions on the Jewish marriage custom? Okay. Bear with me one second, and we'll get into verse 15. Christy, what do you got? The breaking of the glass is a Jewish custom that came about later. Yeah, nothing in the Bible about breaking the glass. Yep. Now, I'm not going to get on a rabbit trail. We got a lot to cover, and I want to get through it. There's some neat stuff we're going to get to. That was pretty neat, but there's better stuff. Okay, verse 15. So I say all that to say this. In verse 15, Jesus is saying it's not time to fast and mourn. Okay, the bride and the groom are here. There's going to be a time to do this, but right now I am with you. So there's no time. We're not fasting now. There's a time to do that, and this is not it. Okay, verse 16. We don't fast because it is not time to fast. We don't use a new piece of cloth as a patch. Do you know what that means? So, and now you might not know this about me, but I actually used to sew quite a bit. And I know how to sew and run a sewing machine, and I enjoyed it. It was a hobby for me back in college. I don't want to get into it any further. And if you're going to sew a patch on a garment, if you have some jeans, you can't use these old jeans and put a patch that's brand new on it because that patch will shrink. The pants have already gone through the process of shrinking, and it'll ruin it. Okay, so you don't do that. In the same way, in verse 17, we don't fast because it is not time to fast. We don't use a new wine. We don't put new wine in an old wineskin. So when it's talking about bottles of wine, they were wine skins. That's what they put them in. We would, consider them like bags. So you don't put new wine in an old wineskin because what would happen? The wine, with the process of fermentation, is going to expand per wineskin. So in the same way, Jesus is saying there's a way to do this, and now this is not it. We don't fast right now. The bride and the groom are here. It's time to celebrate. This is a great time. Okay, we will fast, but not now. Okay, any questions on what we've talked about so far, or can I move on to verses 18 and 19? Louis, what you got? Mm-hmm.
The garments and the wineskins.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. My short answer is I don't know. The question was, could he also be talking there about the old covenant and the new covenant? So, yeah, they're both preserved. But my short answer is I don't know, but I'm going to look into it because that interests me. But yeah, maybe. Write it down. Let's talk about that when we're done. Right? Yeah, without getting on a rabbit trail again. Good question. Okay, let's read verses 18 and 19. While he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler and worshipped him, saying, My daughter is even now dead. But come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. And Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. So we're going to talk about this story, which continues on down to verse 26 for a little bit. There is so much in here that's really neat. I didn't want to rush through it. So starting in verse 18, what should we notice in verse 18 that tells us something about this man that came to Jesus? Yes. He was a ruler, and that is good. It's not what I was looking for, but that's the answer of another question I'm going to ask soon. Okay, what should we notice about this man that came? Mason? That tells us something more. That's what I mean.
Yeah, when he left to go find Jesus, however long that took,
Yeah.
his daughter was already dead, meaning she'd been dead for a long time, so he either already knew about Jesus, or he was familiar with Jesus in some way, shape, or form, and he had faith in him already because he knew his daughter was dead before he left to go meet Jesus. So
Okay, so this guy had an idea, and I think he knew flat out who Jesus was before he went to go get him. Now, what did he do as soon as he got to Jesus? Mac? He worshiped him. Let me ask you this, folks. How many of you have run up to a stranger and started the conversation by worshiping them? None of us? Does that mean something? He had an idea of who Jesus was. This man knew Jesus was Messiah. There's two reasons. Number one, he worshiped him. Number two, he came to him because his daughter had died. I'm not just going to go, I don't care how good of a doctor you are. I'm not going to come running up to you saying, hey, my daughter's dead. I need you to come and help. A doctor's going to say, looks like you found the problem. Call the coroner. He came to him because he knew Jesus was Messiah. What does Messiah mean? No, but I mean a good enough answer, but not literally. I'm looking for a little more of a literal answer. Anointed one. Yes, Pam, that's exactly what it means. There's another term we use. Mac? The chosen one. Very good. Okay, the chosen one, the anointed one. That is the literal translation for the Greek word, the Hebrew word Messiah. What is the Greek equivalent to Messiah? Remember, Old Testament was written in Hebrew almost entirely, not entirely, but very close to it. New Testament was written in Greek. So there's a Hebrew and a Greek word that mean roughly the same thing. Messiah in the Old Testament, what in the New Testament? Christ. What? Who said it? Christ. Very good. He is the Christ, the anointed one, the chosen one. I use the term Messiah. Okay, very good. Let's see where we are. So the Jews were waiting for God to come to earth for thousands of years. Jesus is the one they were waiting for. Now, not everyone believed that when he showed up, but that's another story. Now, we also see that this man had faith. He knew that Jesus could bring her back from the dead. Now, there is another important fact about this man. It is not mentioned here in the book of Matthew. Does anyone know what it is? This story is found in Matthew 9, where we are going over it. It's found in Mark 5, and it's found in Luke 8, I think. Yes.
Is he a Roman?
He is not a Roman. There was a Roman, yep, but that was a servant sick. But, yep, good question, or good guess. What's a fact about this guy that's important, not listed here in Matthew? Yes.
Gentile?
Nope. Mason? He was a ruler in the synagogue. Very good. Okay, who thinks he's done enough question answering and needs to take a break? We got 1, 2 in the back. Okay. I'm going to cut Mason off for a minute. That's very good. He was the leader of the local synagogue. His name was, what do you think his name was, Smarty Pants? Jairus. Very good. Okay, so yes, Mason. Very good, Jairus. Okay, so let's go to Mark 5, verse 22. I'm just going to keep going. You guys can turn there if you like. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus, I have no idea how to pronounce the name, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet. Okay, so there's only one quick point to make here. The best study help for the Bible is the Bible. Having a good, broad understanding of every book of the Bible will help you learn and understand more of any book you're studying. We get to define terms by using the Bible as a dictionary. The Bible has a definition for gospel, for apostle, for all kinds of words. We just have to know where to find that definition. So that's all I'm going to give you there. I just wanted to make that point. Because we're going to use the book of Mark here, and we're going to use the book of Luke to give us more details about the same story. So if you're ever reading through a portion of the Gospels, remember, 4 of them were written. Some Gospels are the only one to contain a certain story. Other stories are represented in multiple of the Gospels. So if you can read them all at the same time, it helps you learn a lot more. That's my only point. Okay, so let's see where we are. Verse 19, Jesus and the gang followed this guy to see his daughter. Any questions so far? And we'll move on to verse 20. Yes, Mac? Oh. They were a gang. They were the 12. Yep. Yep, OG 12. There are already 12 by this point. Yep. So I don't know the timeline as far as when Jesus started his ministry and when there were actually 12, other than we see them called in the book of Matthew a few at a time in the first few chapters. And I think Matthew was the last one called, but I'd really have to look at that before I was positive. Pretty early on in all the Gospels, you got it, there were 12 of them. Because we find out very soon after this point that Jesus not anoints, he ordains the 12. But we'll get there. All right, let's read verses 20, 21, and 22. And behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years came behind him and touched the hem of his garment, for she said within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole. But Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be of good comfort, thy faith hath made thee whole, and the woman was made whole from that hour. Okay, so in the middle of this story about the dead child, the daughter of Jairus, I think I say Jairus. I'm going to stick with that. In the middle of the story about the dead girl, the daughter of Jairus, who Jesus raises from the dead, we're going to see that in just a little bit, there's this interlude about a woman who was sick for 12 years. In verse 20, there are 5 pieces of information given to us. All of them are important. Number 1, it was a woman. Number 2, she had a blood disease. Number 3, it was in her life for 12 years. Number 4, she came behind Jesus. And number 5, she touched the hem of his garment. They all have significance, and we're going to look at all of them. Bless you. So we assume this blood disease was external, meaning she bled. We don't think it was like sickle cell anemia or some type of blood disease that is internal. The reason for this is that anyone with a disease where you bleed, what did it make you? Man or woman, doesn't matter. Glenn? Hey, he had his hand up, folks. Okay? Come on. Very good. Makes you unclean. This has significance. Remember, when we read about clean and unclean, in the Bible, it has nothing to do with dirt. It also has no moral significance. It has nothing to do with sin. Most every time we read about someone becoming unclean, they did nothing wrong. Everyone on earth, man or woman, through typical daily life, is going to be unclean from time to time and have to go through the process of become ritualistically clean. What it meant was you were not permitted to be involved with several religious ceremonies. You could not enter the synagogue on Shabbat. You could not bring a sacrifice to the temple. You could not take part in the holy days. And there are several instances, and I'm not going to go through them all. If you want to read about them, go to Leviticus, start in chapter 11, go all the way through chapter 22, and you'll read about lots and lots and lots of ways that people can become unclean. This woman being unclean means she is not allowed to take part in most of Jewish life. Most of her culture, she was not allowed to be a part of, almost to the point of being a leper. This woman predominantly lived in isolation for 12 years. The reason I'm explaining this is because we can read the story and kind of just gloss over this like, oh yeah, a woman was sick and Jesus healed her. Okay, well, that's good. This was a very serious case. Do you know that this woman spent all the money she had in the world on doctors to try to fix this problem? And she found no solution. We read about that in, I think, Luke 8:43. And a woman having an issue of blood 12 years, which had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any. So she spent all the money she had in the world to try to solve this problem. The reason was she couldn't be a part of society, a part of her own family, because of what she had going on. Excuse me. This woman came up behind Jesus to touch him. Why? Carlos? You didn't? Okay, I thought I saw a hand up. Lindsay?
I don't think she had faith that if she asked Jesus, he would heal her, so she felt like she had to take.
Mm-hmm.
So she was scared that she wasn't going to get the answer she wanted.
Okay, so just for the folks at home, Lindsay said that she might have thought that Jesus might not have healed her, or that she didn't have enough faith, and therefore she wanted to go up and get it herself because she was concerned she might not be able to be healed if she confronted him and asked for it. Is that it? He might be too busy. Sure. She had to go get it. Okay. So I think that absolutely can be, a correct answer. Here's what I was thinking. I was thinking because of her issue of blood, she thought if I go right to him, someone's going to stop me because I'm not allowed. Because you got to remember, anyone that was unclean, one thing that you're also not allowed to do, you're not allowed to touch the person. You're not allowed to touch anyone, otherwise you make them unclean. Okay? Now, I don't know, obviously this is conjecture, but she was concerned to the point where she went out of her way to get to Jesus from behind, and she grabbed the hem of his garment, and she was made whole. Okay, let's see where we're at. She touched the hem of his garment. What was it that she touched? Very good, Pam. His tassel. The Bible calls them tzitzits. Now, this is a Hebrew word. We're not going to find that word in our English Bible, but that's what the tassels were. That's what the fringes on the borders of the garment were. So, the seat, they are fringes on the borders of their garment. And guess who wore them? Priest did. What's that? Jewish priests did. Yeah. All Jewish men wore them. Okay, let's take a look. Now, this one I want you to turn to. This one's important. Numbers 38, verse 15. You're going to want to see this. Numbers 38, verse 15. When Washington and I were driving over here, we had to go pick some. What's that? Oh, sorry. Let's try that again. Let's do Numbers 15, 38. We'll have a lot more luck doing that. There's only 36 chapters in Numbers. Thank you, Lindsay. Numbers 15, 38. And here we go. Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of the borders a ribbon of blue. And it shall be unto you for a fringe, that ye may look upon it, and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and do them, and that ye seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after which ye use to go a-whoring, that ye remember and do all my commandments, and be holy unto your God. So, the seat are a reminder of the commandments of the Lord and that we should do them. It was a tool that was used to help remember. Now, something in Jewish culture was the use of repetition. There was a lot of oral tradition. And the way they would remember it is they would repeat it, and they would repeat it, and they would repeat it, and it would become a part of their life where they would repeat it every day. And the Jews had prayers for everything they do. They wanted to be thankful of God for everything he provided. They wanted to include God in their life at every point. And the seat was a reminder all the time that they are the children of God. These are the commandments that God wants them to follow, and how they are supposed to behave and obey. We all need reminders. Do you know why the habit, the custom of Christianity today is to go to church every week? They did it the same all the way back, forever, for thousands of years, one day a week, every week. It was a reminder. So we can hit the reset button and be like, yep, that's right, I remember. This is who I'm supposed to be. This is who God is. This is how I'm supposed to behave. It was a helpful reminder. Every Sabbath day, okay, went to the synagogue, recited the Torah, read the Bible. So, let's see. Now, many of you have probably noticed that I have these strange tassels on my belt. And I know some of you have had questions about them because some people ask me about them. And the answers to those questions are, number one, this is why I do it. Because of this command. It is a helpful reminder in my life who I am, who God is, the commandments of the Lord, and how I'm supposed to behave. That's it. It's just a reminder. It's a helpful reminder. Yes, ma'am.
Do you ever come across anybody else that has them?
Yes, very rarely. So here's the deal, okay? There are several reasons I do this, okay? But let me start with this. I said there are two questions everyone asks. So number one, this is why I do it. Number two, no, I am not Jewish. Nobody named Patrick, who is Irish, is Jewish, including me. So the question was, do you ever come across anybody else that wears them? So yes, it's very rare, but more so do I come across other people that wear them. I come across people that know what they are. And that means we have a lot in common. Because if I were to quiz 1 million Christians, I would doubt 5 would know what they are or where to find the verse in the Bible. It's also very handy for if you end up in a fight in a bar, you know who's on your side just by looking. Okay. So, the Jewish men at the time of Christ wore the tzitzit on the corners of their prayer shawl. Now, I am going to show you something here. Okay, this, which, I'm going to take a drink of water before I do this. This is called the talit. So the talit is a prayer shawl that the Jewish men would wear. It has on the top what is called the atalah, or the crown. This is how you know what the top of the garment is. And this is a garment that not only the priests would wear, although they did, but this is a garment that every Jewish male wore at the time of Christ. And in the way that you would put one of these on is you would face the atalah towards yourself and you would recite a prayer. And the prayer goes, and bear with me here because I know about as much Hebrew as you know Chinese, goes, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam Ashur Ashur. I'm going to cheat. You know when you get in front of everybody and you get nervous. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam Ashur kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzavu lachit at ba tzitzi. I butchered it. I practiced so much. Yeah. So that means, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who enriches our lives with holiness and commands us to wrap ourselves in the tzitzit. So the men would recite that before they would put this on every day, and then they would put it on as a cape like this. And then, to make sure you have the tzitzit on all 4 corners of the garment, you needed one on the front left and the front right, one on your back left and your back right. You would put it on like so, on the corners of your garment. They wore this all day, every day. Jesus wore this all day, every day. We know he wore it that day because the woman with the issue of blood went up to him and wanted to just grab the hem of his garment. And she said that she knew she would be able to be healed. Now, this prayer shawl is called the talit. This one belongs to my friend Kenton Miller. He has since passed away many years ago. He bought this one, or his wife bought this one for him when he was in Israel, and his wife and his daughter allowed me to bring it here tonight to use as a teaching aid and show you what a talit is. So the 4 tzitzit on each corner are unique in several ways. Number one, there are 5 knots on the seat. There are 8 strands on the seat. 8 and 5 equals 13. Now the word seat, if you know anything about Hebrew, each Hebrew character has a corresponding number attached. The number added up for the word equals 600. 600 plus the 5 knots plus the 8 strands is 613. It's the exact number of laws in the Torah, in the law of Moses. It says in Numbers that they are to have a ribbon of blue. Along with that name, the word used is the actual shade of blue that is supposed to be gotten from a certain animal. I don't remember what animal it is. Another important part about the talit is these corners. These corners that the seat are attached to are called the wings. Now that's going to be important in a minute. Yeah, so there are 613 laws in the law of Moses. What you find is that every Hebrew character has a numeric value to it. When you tally up the number of the letters in the name of the talit, it totals 600. Okay? The seat has 5 knots and 8 strands. 8 plus 5 is 13. That 13 added to the 600 for the word seat, not talit, equals 613. And remember, what is the purpose of the seat? The purpose of it is to look upon it through your day and to remember the commandments of God and who we are and that we're supposed to obey them. Because isn't that the whole struggle of the Christian life? Is to remember at the hard parts of the day that I'm a Christian and I'm supposed to act like it? Lindsay. That's a great question. Let me get into that later. Okay. Fair enough? Yeah. Okay, so verse 21. Let's get back to Matthew and look at verse 21. For she said within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole. This woman too was a believer. She believed Jesus was Messiah. Now, as I said before, in the days of Jesus, all the men wore this garment. Obviously, Jesus was wearing it this day because the woman came up to him and grabbed this garment. Do you know about when Jesus was crucified and it talked about they parted his garments? This was the garment they parted. This was what they were casting lots for. This was what they wanted. Other than this, he had a general poor man's tunic and sandals. He had nothing special, of no value. This was the only thing in his life of value. Typically, a man would be buried in his talit. In other, groups, it would be given to the wife. So they took the only thing of Jesus. I believe the Roman soldiers did that because they knew that it had significance to him and these people that they called the Jews. And they wanted, as one more way to mock Jesus, was to take his only earthly possession that would have meant anything to his family who was standing there while he was crucified. So, the woman with the issue of blood knew that if she could just get close enough to Jesus to touch the seat, she would be healed. Why? Because in Malachi 4:2, there is a messianic prophecy. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings. What were the corners of the garment called? The wings. There was a messianic prophecy that when Messiah comes, he will heal with his wings. She knew if she could just get near him to touch, she would be healed. There was healing in his wings. Verse 21. There is a problem we encounter. When someone is unclean, they are not allowed to touch another person until they have been made ritualistically clean. The woman touches Jesus. Was Jesus made unclean? Got a couple no's. Okay, got more no's. Some of you are thinking about it. Okay. That's right. Okay, the woman touches Jesus. Was he made unclean? Let us look at the process of becoming clean again. For men and women who are both made unclean during the course of normal life, they would be made clean again by waiting till evening and bathing in running water. That was it. It wasn't a big to-do. Does anyone know what the ritualistic cleansing was called? Mikvah. It is the predecessor to our baptism. There were several rules for the mikvah. One was that you had to be completely submerged. Isn't that neat? Now, if you want to learn a lot about mikvah, its history, and Jesus being baptized, then go to the video that we have, Matthew part 5, and I go over the mikvah, Jesus' baptism, the whole story about all of it. Start the video at about 33 minutes, and I explain a ton, and it is pretty neat, if I can pat myself on the back. But right now, I would like to read about the mikvah and its use to become clean. And we can do this in Leviticus, starting in chapter 11. We can go all the way through chapter 22. I would just like to look at one verse in Leviticus chapter 22, verse 6, which I wrote here on the board. The soul which hath touched any such thing shall be unclean until even, and shall not eat of the holy things, unless he wash his flesh with water. So as you can see here, all you had to do was bathe in water, the mikvah, and wait till sundown. That was it. And then you're clean and you can go about your day. The mikvah made you clean. The word mikvah in Hebrew is a verb. It is the bathing, the process that makes you clean. This is interesting because we read about a messianic prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 13. O Lord, the hope of all Israel, all that forsake thee shall be ashamed, and they that depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. Do you know what living waters are? Literally. Living waters, did you say a river? So a river is an example, but there are several. What makes a river living water? It's moving. It's a natural source of moving water. Jesus, what was he called? Okay, yeah. What's that? He was called the living water, right? He was the water from the rock. Not only that, you go to Jeremiah 17:13 when you read, O Lord, the hope of all Israel. Do you know the Hebrew word that they translated into the hope? The Hebrew word is mikvah. Now, we know that living water. A mikvah is required to have living water. They found these, they've excavated all over Israel and near everywhere where the tabernacle first was settled. So when they came to Israel and they took over the land, they went to Shiloh. And I can't find it for some reason on here. It's okay. I'm going to find it as soon as I don't need to point to it anymore. So they set up the tabernacle in Shiloh right after they came into the promised land. And they and the tabernacle stayed there. So they no longer broke down the tent and set it up again while they were wandering around the desert for 40 years. They set it in one place. And when you go to Shiloh, they have hundreds of these mikvah, okay, these baths that they chisel out of rock so the rains fill them, running water. Because everybody needed to dunk in these things before they offered a sacrifice, for the priests to do their duty. Every time people were ritualistically unclean and needed that fixed, which was all the time. They found the same thing in Jerusalem. Anywhere the Jews set up shop, and not just during this time, but for hundreds of years as the Jews moved around the world, before they would build a synagogue or a temple, they would have a mikveh. So, Jesus was living water. Jesus was the mikveh. So, the woman who was unclean because of her disease, who if she touched anyone would have made them unclean, she could not make Jesus unclean because he was the thing to make her clean. He was the mikveh. Okay. Verse 21, back to our story. When the unclean woman with the issue of blood touched Jesus, it was not a problem. And it was because, prophesied more than 500 years ago, Messiah would be our mikveh. It worked the same way, Nick, I think you mentioned it, earlier on in Matthew chapter 8 when Jesus touched the leper. Leper wasn't supposed to touch him. He wasn't supposed to touch a leper. But it didn't matter because he is the thing that makes us clean. Okay, now, verse 22. This is neat. But Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, "Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole." Why did Jesus turn around? How do you know that, Pam? Pam said he felt virtue leave his body. Doesn't say it in Matthew. Says it in Mark. It's exactly why he turned around. Let's read this verse in Mark 5, verse 30. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, "Who touched my clothes?" Jesus sensed that virtue had gone out of him. What does that imply? Yeah, that's exactly what happened. He felt something leave him, but what does that imply? It implies that Jesus had no say in the healing of that woman. It was a surprise to him. Someone touched the hem of his garment, she was healed, and he felt it. I don't know what that was like. But he stopped and he turned around and said, "Who touched me?" Now, what else was interesting in that story that we don't read about here in Matthew? All sorts of people around. They were packed together. He was moving through the crowd to try to get to this woman who was the young girl who was dead. So the disciples are like, "Who touched you?" Everybody's rubbing shoulders with everybody. This is a subway car in Japan at, rush hour. Everyone, what are you talking about? Jesus meant, who I had virtue leave me, who's responsible? Now, Jesus even tells her the mechanism for her healing. He says, "Your faith hath made thee whole." We read about this many times throughout the Gospels and the book of Acts. The faith of the person being healed seems to be part of the formula. Yes, ma'am?
She believed he could heal,
Yes.
and that's why it worked.
You got it. It was her belief. We even find times when Jesus condemns those who were not able to heal or be healed, and he says it was their unbelief that was the problem. Yep. And remember, what was the problem when Jesus could not heal in Mark chapter 6, which I got several angry comments about when I said that a couple weeks ago? Okay, yeah. It was their unbelief. Okay, and it was the faithless and perverse generation, okay, I believe talking about the apostles, who also had some issues. Okay, it's a very interesting topic, which I do not want to get much further into right now. Mason, do you have a question?
Yeah, so does this mean that the lady who touched him, she was either raised in synagogue and paid attention, or she knew it herself? Because I mean, she could have just known that by gut instinct, but they didn't teach women, I don't think, a lot how to read back then. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but the men were the ones that were supposed to be reading the Torah and studying that.
Okay,
She knew it, so
yeah.
she could have sat around and listened to it.
Okay, lots of good questions there. So the question has to do with, how did this woman know this? One thing that you said that I want to point out that was incorrect is the literacy of women in that country. Now, the problem was not literacy. One of the problems was the Hebrew language. Because remember, everybody spoke Greek. Greek was the language worldwide. Everybody. The scriptures that they were using at that time, they were not Hebrew scriptures. They had what was called the Septuagint, which was translated. The rabbis took the Old Testament scriptures in Hebrew, translated them into Greek 3 centuries before Christ. And when you read Jesus quoting from scripture, you find that he was quoting from the Septuagint, not the Hebrew manuscripts, because there are subtle differences, as in every translation. Okay, one word to another. Okay, we get the closest there is, but there are many subtleties to language. So you find that Paul, Peter, Jesus, whenever they quoted the scriptures, they were not quoting Hebrew. They were quoting the Septuagint in Greek. Hebrew was the language used in the synagogues, in the temples, for the feast days, on Shabbat, okay, and not everybody knew that. There were lots that didn't. Who was one of the guys that shouldn't have known that language? Yeah, the carpenter. Remember, they were surprised one time, and they're like, who is this guy that knows the scriptures like this? He wasn't supposed to know it, not that well. So, your question is, how did this woman know about the prophesy in Malachi about the wings? So, short answer, I don't know if she did know. And number 2, if she did know, she very clearly just took an interest in the scriptures that clearly the Pharisees did not. And I don't have a problem with either of those answers. Remember, when the disciples of John the Baptist come to Jesus at one point and they say, are you the Messiah or should we expect another? Because they knew the scriptures, and the scriptures said before the Messiah comes, there will be someone who will prepare the way. It was funny that the disciples of John the Baptist did not know that John the Baptist was the one that was going to lead the way. Okay, they didn't know that he was a prophet. Okay, they missed that, and they asked Jesus, are you the one? Or is there one that's going to come after you? And what did Jesus say? He didn't say yes or no. He said, go and tell John what you've seen. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, right? And the gospel is preached to the poor. I think that's what he said, but you can look it up. So even the guys that were serious about it didn't notice that he was fulfilling those prophecies. So this woman, who might have known this prophecy, might not have thought about it until afterward, and she's like, oh, wait a minute. Malachi, I can't believe that it happened. I don't know which way it worked. But we do see messianic prophecies fulfilled by people that didn't know it was a messianic prophecy until later. Tricky like that. Good question. Okay, where are we? We're late, but let's see if we can get through just a little more. Do you want to get through the next section, or do you want to stop and have a question or two and be out of here? Other than the kids. Keep going? You got to speak up. If you want me to stop, you got to say so, because I want to keep going. Okay. Okay, let's get through just a little bit more. Let's finish off this this portion, verses 23 through 26. And when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, he said unto them, Give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when the people were put forth, he went in and took her by the hand, and the maid arose, and the fame hereof went abroad into all that land. Okay, verse 23, mourners were present because the girl was dead. Verse 24, nobody was confused about the girl being dead. Jesus, I believe, is referencing the born-again believer, because he said she's not dead, she's sleeping. I believe he's referencing the born-again believer, because when we die, we are referred to as asleep. Why? Because when you're asleep, you wake up. It is hinting at the resurrection. So I think Jesus that's what he was mentioning is, oh, no, she's not dead. She's asleep because she's about to be resurrected. Now, they laughed him to scorn. They knew she was dead. Verse 25, who was there with Jesus? No. Nope. So the mom and dad were there of the daughter. Nope. He did tell everyone to leave, but he also says that he was there with some people. In Mark 5:37, we see that Jesus was there with Peter, James, and John. Now, I mention that because these three are favored. When there is a small group with Jesus, it is always these three, Peter, James, and John. On the Mount of Transfiguration, at the Garden of Gethsemane, and here at the daughter of Jairus. Also at the Mount of Olives, these three are present, but at the Mount of Olives, they are also joined by Andrew. I have no idea why. I'll look that up and try to find an answer for it when we get there. So these three are with Jesus in this meeting. In verse 26, the girl arose, and the fame went into all the land. Okay, let's read the last portion. We're not going to finish the chapter, but we'll get a few more verses in. 27 to 31, and that'll be it. And when Jesus departed thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou Son of David, have mercy on us. And when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus saith unto them, Believe ye that I am able to do this? They said unto him, Yea, Lord. Then touched he their eyes, saying, According to your faith be it unto you. And their eyes were opened, and Jesus straitly charged them, saying, See that no man know it. But they, when they were departed, spread abroad his fame in all that country. Okay. So verse 27, these 2 men calling Jesus the Son of David is another name for Messiah. They were demonstrating their belief and their faith. We know who you are. You are the Son of God. You are Messiah, God in the flesh. Okay, please heal us of our blindness. In verse 28, when Jesus asks them about this, they confess their faith. Now keep in mind, these men are blind. They have not seen any miracles that Jesus has performed. And they believe he is Messiah. That is the definition of faith. They did not see a single miracle, and they believed that he was God. Verse 29, here again, the faith of he that is made whole is acknowledged as part of the formula. I hate to say it, but our faith has something to do with it. I don't really hate to say it. I'm just saying that it's disappointing that our unbelief can get in the way we believe the man rose from the dead. How do we not believe he can heal thus and so? Verse 30. Jesus says the words, he straightly charged them. He gave them a command, see that no man know it. He healed them of blindness. And he said, see that nobody knows that I healed you of blindness. Do you understand the issue here? See that no man know it? How are they supposed to do that? Pretend that they're blind and keep bumping into stuff? Like what does that even look like? Verse 31, did they keep the secret? Nope. I have no earthly idea, Nick. If there was ever a time in the Bible at the end of a verse to write LOL to give great clarity, that was it. But he doesn't. I'm figuring this out. So I have no idea what Jesus was thinking, but when I read that, I was like, how do you go home to your wife and kids and not tell them and they tell everybody, and like within 24 hours, the whole city's at your door going like this? Anyway, if anyone knows any more about that verse and what was going on there and what Jesus expected, I would love to know it. It's one of the questions I will have for him when I see him one day. Good job, everybody. I got two more things for you. Okay, this is just one special thing that I looked up, and then I have a question for you. You can do your homework. How long did the woman suffer with the issue of blood? 12 years. How old was the little girl who was dead that Jesus resurrected? 12 years old. Your homework is, how is that connected? Because it is. Because Jesus didn't give us that information for no reason. So you're supposed to figure that out. Okay, the last thing I want to give you is a little history of Judaism in the 14th century. The Jews were giving several commandments about ritualistic cleanliness. They were told they had to mikvah after so many different things. Do you understand that the men would mikvah every Friday leading up to Shabbat? It was something that they did regularly. Do you know that a husband and a wife would mikvah prior to getting married? Do you remember when Wayne and Mindy got married? Now, Mindy, I led her to the Lord just the week before. She got saved. Wayne said, hey, we're starting over, new step in our life. I'd like to get baptized with my wife. I said, that's great. I pointed this idea out to him. This was a normal occurrence in the life of the Jews. The mikvah was something that happened regularly. It wasn't this thing that you did it once and then that was the end of it. They had rules for washing your hands. You washed your hands before you ate. You did it with running water. You washed your hands after you touched a dead body. You would actually do a mikvah. Okay, they had rules for you washed your hands after you went to the bathroom. Do you know those rules are written down in the Bible? Do you know what those rules did for the Jews for centuries and centuries? They kept them from disease. And in 1348, when the Black Plague spread throughout Europe, there were communities that were not affected. God's people. Yeah. And do you know what happened? They were blamed for the Black Plague, and they were hunted down and persecuted. And all they were doing was living by the Bible. And by doing that, now, a couple hundred years later, we learn about microorganisms. And we find out that that's a problem and we need to do something about that. The world didn't know it, but those who followed the commandments of the Lord, they were blessed. Their health was blessed above all nations of the earth. The Bible talks about that. Okay, we didn't know why that was going to happen. We figured it was a supernatural thing. It wasn't. It was a practical consequence of living a godly life in obedience to the Old Testament commands. I thought that was pretty neat. Okay, let's have a word of prayer and we will be dismissed. Glenn, you want to lead us in a word of prayer? Go for it, buddy.